Ric Flair is the loudest name in wrestling history. The Nature Boy, the man with 16 world championships, private jets, custom robes that cost more than houses, limousines waiting outside every arena. The man who made woo a sound that echoes through every wrestling show even today. Wrestling cannot forget Ric Flair. His name is carved into the industry. His face is on the Mount Rushmore. But in 2025, something massive happened that changed the conversation forever. John Cena stood in the ring in Scotland on Monday Night Raw. The crowd was electric. Cena was on his retirement tour, his final run, and he made a promise that sent shockwaves through the entire wrestling world. He wants to win his 17th world championship at WrestleMania 41, but winning the title is not enough for Cena. He wants more than that. He wants to erase Ric Flair from history. He said it clearly. He plans to scrub the name of the fun machine, the jet flying, the wooing Ric Flair from the record books entirely. Cena wants to be the last real champion, the only name that matters. Ric Flair heard every word of that promo, and he responded. The woo is not going away, Flair said. Not now, not ever. He will be there at WrestleMania 41. He will sit in the front row. He will watch John Cena try to erase him, and he is glad he is still alive to hear it all happen. That moment brings us to the massive question everyone is asking right now. How good was Ric Flair? If you want more stories like this, use the hype feature and give hype to this video. It helps me bring you the next wrestling legend and the truth behind their careers. Because the truth is, wrestling cannot agree on Ric Flair at all. Some legends say he was the greatest in-ring worker who ever lived. They say he could carry anyone to a 5-star match. He could wrestle for 60 minutes and make it look easy. He was the standard, the blueprint, the measuring stick. But other legends tell a completely different story. They say Flair was a routine man, a performer who did the exact same match every single night, regardless of opponent or storyline. And modern eyes are judging the behavior alongside the wrestling. The plane incident, the excess that crossed every line, the inability to walk away when his body was screaming at him to stop. This is the full story of what wrestling legends really said when they were asked about Ric Flair. The admiration, the criticism, the uncomfortable truths, and the moments that make you question everything. The debate about Flair is real. It has been real for decades. And it all starts with the man who hated his work more than anyone else in business. Bret Hart did not buy the Ric Flair myth for 1 second. The Hitman was a different type of wrestler entirely. He represented realism, technical precision, ring psychology that made sense, logic in every move. And when people asked Bret about Flair, he gave them the cold, hard truth without any sugarcoating. Ric Flair was a routine man. That term did not come from Bret himself originally. It came from his father, Stu Hart. Stu ran the legendary dungeon in Calgary. He trained hundreds of wrestlers, and he had a specific label for certain performers. A routine man was someone who performed the exact same match structure no matter who the opponent was, no matter what the storyline required, no matter what the crowd wanted to see. Same opening sequence, same middle spots, same finishing stretch, every single time. Bret said Flair's entire moveset was made up of cartoon high spots, ridiculously phony maneuvers that did not look believable for even a moment. And Flair did not invent these moves himself. He stole them directly from earlier stars like Jackie Fargo and Buddy Rogers. He copied their work and just kept repeating it for 40 years. The Flair flip over the corner turnbuckle was the worst offender in Bret's eyes. The sequence went like this every time. Flair would get Irish whipped into the corner. He would flip over the top turnbuckle. He would land perfectly on his feet on the ring apron. Then he would jog all the way to the adjacent corner, and then he would stand there, waiting. For 10 to 15 seconds, Flair would just wait. His opponent would slowly walk over. Then the opponent would very carefully and obviously place both hands on Flair's chest. And only then would Flair take a perfectly choreographed backflip down to the floor. Bret called it 30 minutes of non-stop non-psychology. It was not real wrestling in his view. It was not storytelling. It was just a performance with no internal logic. No reason for anything that happened. Just spots that the crowd expected to see because they had seen them 1,000 times before. The signature chops were another major problem for Bret. Fans absolutely loved the chops. Every time Flair would chop someone across the chest, the entire arena would shout "woo" in unison. It became one of the most iconic crowd participation moments in wrestling. But Bret said the chops looked like complete rubbish. They were stiff shots that caused legitimate physical pain to the opponent, real bruising, real welts that lasted for days, and they did not add anything to the match's narrative at all. They were just violence for the sake of getting a crowd reaction. Bret compared Flair's style to the work of Randy Savage and Mick Foley. Those men understood true psychology, according to Bret. Every move they did had a reason. Every sell meant something. Every transition made logical sense within the story being told. Flair had none of that depth, but Bret's critique went beyond just stylistic disagreements about moves and sequences. He raised serious questions about Flair's physical capabilities and his professional ethics as well. Bret recalled a specific incident that happened during a match in New Haven. The planned finish for the match was a flying crossbody block. Flair was supposed to catch Bret in midair as he came off the ropes. Then they would both tumble over the top rope together in a dramatic finish. But when the moment came, Flair simply did not have the physical strength to catch Bret properly. They collapsed in an awkward, embarrassing heap instead of executing the planned spot cleanly. That botch was bad enough on its own, but what happened afterward made it worse in Bret's eyes. According to Bret, Flair went into the dressing room after the match and blamed Bret for the mistake. Flair wanted to protect his own reputation as an established legend, so he made it seem like Bret, who was still considered relatively inexperienced at that point, had messed up the finish. Flair threw him under the bus to save face. Bret's critique also extended to how matches were called in real time. He accused Flair of telegraphing every single move before it happened. Flair would go blank mentally in the ring, according to Bret. He could not adapt on the fly. He could not read the crowd and adjust the match accordingly. He could not call a match organically based on what was happening moment to moment. Instead, he just fell back on his repetitive routine because that was all he knew how to do safely. Flair was indeed a master of the Broadway style of wrestling. Those were the 60-minute matches that were specifically designed to end in a time limit draw. High stamina was required, the ability to pace yourself over a full hour. But Bret argued that stamina alone does not make someone a great worker. Endurance is not the same thing as skill. The technical disagreement between Bret and Flair went much deeper than just personal preference. Bret believed that professional wrestling should look as real as possible within the confines of the performance. Every punch should look like it connects. Every hold should look like it genuinely hurts. Every reaction should make logical sense. Flair's entire style was the complete opposite of that philosophy. Big theatrical flops, obviously waiting around for the next choreographed spot, setups that anyone could see coming from a mile away. Bret loved wrestlers who could adapt their performance to the specific circumstances of each match, who changed their approach based on the crowd's energy level, based on what the storyline required, based on who their opponent was. Flair never adapted according to Bret. He just did his thing the same way every time and relied on his natural charisma to cover up the repetition. And the thing is, Bret Hart was not alone in noticing these patterns. Other technical workers in the locker room saw the exact same sequences repeated night after night. They saw the same reliance on flashy persona to hide the lack of variety in the actual wrestling content. The chops became a perfect symbol of the philosophical divide in wrestling. To the fans, they were an iconic part of Flair's brand, part of what made him special and unique. But to Bret, they represented unnecessary pain that looked terrible on camera and served no real narrative purpose. Real bruises and real welts that the opponent had to deal with, all for a cheap crowd pop. The New Haven botch really stuck with Bret over the years, not just because the spot went wrong. Spots go wrong sometimes in wrestling. That happens. But what bothered Bret was how Flair handled it afterward, blaming someone else to protect yourself. That was not how a true professional should conduct themselves in Bret's view. Bret's overall critique was never about personal jealousy or bitterness. It was about having standards for the craft. He believed professional wrestling should be treated as a legitimate art form, something to be studied and perfected. And Ric Flair, in Bret's strongly held opinion, was just a showman who relied on shortcuts and charisma instead of putting in the real work to be great technically. The routine man label followed Flair for years after Bret started using it publicly. Every single time someone would ask Bret Hart about who the greatest of all time was, he made it crystal clear. Ric Flair was absolutely not it. To Bret, Flair's entire legacy was built on fame and spectacle rather than actual in-ring skill. The expensive custom robes, the legendary promos, the jet-setting lifestyle that he lived 24 hours a day. Those things made Ric Flair a massive star. Nobody denies that, but they did not make him a legitimately great worker in the ring. And when you actually look closely at the specific technical breakdowns that Bret provided over the years, his argument carries real weight. Flair absolutely did rely on the same signature spots over and over. The flip, the flop, the figure four leg lock, the knife edge chops, all repeated endlessly. Bret also said said that Flair focused primarily on self-promotion above all else. Every match was really about making Ric Flair look good and maintaining his position. Not about making the opponent look strong, not about serving the broader storyline, just keeping Flair at the center of attention at all times. The Hitman's view of Flair was undeniably harsh, but it was also incredibly detailed and specific. It came from someone who had studied the craft of professional wrestling more deeply than almost anyone. Someone who genuinely believed that every single move in a match should have a clear reason and purpose behind it. Flair's defenders would argue that the routine actually worked perfectly well, that fans absolutely loved seeing those same spots every night, that the consistency was part of what made the brand so strong and reliable. But Bret Hart did not care about any of that marketing logic. He cared exclusively about the quality of the actual work itself. And in the end, Bret's harsh critique serves as an important reminder that even the most famous legends in wrestling do not all agree on who truly deserves to be called the greatest. Ric Flair's name recognition is absolutely massive. His cultural impact is completely undeniable. But to Bret Hart, he will always be nothing more than a routine man who never evolved or changed in 40 years. Harley Race saw Ric Flair very differently than Bret Hart did. Race was the ultimate gatekeeper of the old National Wrestling Alliance. He was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a man built entirely on physical toughness and a no-nonsense attitude, real as they come. When Harley Race was asked by the NWA to pass the torch to Ric Flair, it represented a fundamental shift in the identity of the entire organization. The NWA was moving away from the old-school brawling and bleeding style that Race represented. They were moving towards something flashier and more theatrical. Ric Flair was positioned as the future of the business. Starrcade 1983 was the specific moment where this transition happened. The event was called A Flair for the Gold. It was a steel cage match for the World Championship. Harley Race had won the NWA title for a record 7th time earlier that same year by defeating Flair. Now the company was asking him to drop the belt back to Flair on the biggest stage possible. Race was genuinely reluctant to do it at first. He had worked his entire career to build his own legacy, but he ultimately agreed to put Flair over for what he believed was the long-term benefit of the NWA as a whole. The match itself was structured to position Race as the ruthless veteran who would use any unethical tactic to hold on to power. Meanwhile, Flair was presented as the determined young underdog fighting against the corrupt old guard. When Harley Race has been asked to reflect on Ric Flair over the years, his comments have consistently focused on very specific qualities: heart, stamina, the ability to carry an opponent through a match. Race said that from their very first encounter in the ring together, he immediately recognized that Flair had the natural athleticism and the personal charisma required to lead the entire industry into the next era. Race's validation of Flair was particularly significant because it emphasized a skill that even Flair's harshest critics, like Bret Hart, had to acknowledge. Flair could take an opponent with far lesser ability and make that person look 100% better than they actually were. This carrying ability was an absolute prerequisite for being the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. The champion was expected to travel constantly to different territories all across the country, and every single night he had to wrestle the local territory's top star for 60 minutes and make it look competitive. Ric Flair himself has spoken quite openly about this particular era being the most physically grueling period of his entire career. He noted that during his actual first year holding the NWA World Championship, he earned $50,000 less than he had made previously as just a regular performer working for Jim Crockett Promotions. The reason was simple. He did not draw significant money at the gate initially. Fans were not yet fully sold on him as the champion. Flair has recounted in interviews the immense physical toll of having to wrestle a full hour every single night. Often his opponents were local wrestlers who had never worked a match longer than 15 minutes in their entire careers. Flair had to teach them how to pace a Broadway match on the fly while also making sure the match was entertaining enough to satisfy the paying audience. The comfort zone of the NWA championship system was quite simple and predictable. The champion would either win decisively within the 60-minute time limit or the match would go to a time limit draw. This structure protected the champion's credibility while also protecting the local star's reputation in their home territory. That comfort zone was the crucible where the entire Nature Boy persona was gradually forged over time. Harley Race's eventual endorsement of Flair as someone who would go on to become a 16-time world champion served as the ultimate stamp of approval from the old guard. It was the previous generation explicitly saying that Flair was worthy of carrying the business forward into the modern era. But here is the important thing to understand about Race's specific praise. It was primarily about stamina and the ability to carry opponents. It was not about technical brilliance or innovative offense. It was not about creating new moves or revolutionizing psychology. It was specifically specifically about the endurance to work long and the generosity to make others look good. That distinction raises an important question that often gets overlooked. Did the NWA system make Ric Flair into a star? Or did Ric Flair's unique talents make the system work? The answer is probably somewhere in between. The NWA desperately needed a traveling world champion who could work 60-minute matches consistently. Someone with enough charisma to carry the promotional burden. Someone athletic enough to adapt to different opponents every single night. Ric Flair happened to fit that very specific role perfectly. But does fitting the role make you the best actual wrestler, or just the best fit for what the business needed at that moment? Harley Race's validation absolutely matters. He was a legitimate tough guy legend, someone who did not give praise lightly or casually. But even Race's highest praise was quite specific in nature. It was about endurance, about the grind, about the specific skill set required for that particular job. Flair's own honest reflection about his early championship run is quite telling. He made less money initially. He was not drawing big crowds right away. He had to wrestle competitors who were not equipped for 60-minute performances. He essentially had to teach the NWA system to people in real time while also trying to get himself over as a credible champion. That represents genuinely hard work. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. But it also demonstrates that Flair was not an instant draw or an immediate success. He grew into the role gradually over time. The system shaped him just as much as he shaped the system. The comfort zone concept is another revealing detail. The NWA booking structure set very clear rules: win in 60 minutes or go to a draw. That framework protected the champion and made the workload more predictable. It allowed Flair to develop his signature routine because he knew exactly what was expected every night. Harley Race's endorsement gave Flair the legitimacy he needed in the eyes of the old school fans and wrestlers. But it also shows that the previous generation saw Flair primarily as the right choice for the business model, not necessarily as the absolute best pure worker, just the right person for that specific role at that specific time. The torch-passing moment at Starrcade 1983 was deeply symbolic. It represented the end of one complete era and the beginning of another, but it was also fundamentally a business decision. Ric Flair was positioned as the future because the NWA organization decided he should be. Race's praise gets used quite often to defend Flair's legacy as one of the all-time greats. And to be fair, it absolutely should be considered. Race was a genuine legend. His opinion carries enormous weight, but his specific opinion was about a very particular skill set: carrying ability, stamina, not overall technical mastery or innovation. And that distinction matters enormously when people debate whether Flair was truly the greatest of all time. Because greatest can mean many different things. Greatest pure worker, greatest box office draw, greatest character, greatest grinder who could work every night. Harley Race's perspective suggests that Flair was the greatest grinder, the absolute best at traveling constantly and working long matches and elevating opponents. That is genuinely valuable and worthy of respect. But it is not quite the same thing as being the best all-around professional wrestler in history. Sting became a legitimate superstar literally overnight. That is not an exaggeration or hyperbole. March 27th, 1988, the very first Clash of the Champions event. A 45-minute time limit draw between Sting and Ric Flair for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. The main event drew an absolutely staggering 7.1 million viewers on television. The entire match was specifically designed by the NWA to directly counter WrestleMania 4, which was happening on pay-per-view that same night. The NWA wanted to make a major statement that they could still compete with Vince McMahon's national expansion, and they succeeded by immediately creating a new major star. The actual structure of the match reveals the passing the torch psychology that Flair deliberately employed. Despite being the reigning world champion and the established top star, Flair allowed the young Stinger to completely dominate the early portions of the match. Hip tosses, drop kicks, military press slams. Sting looked like an absolute monster. Flair had to repeatedly bail out to the floor just to reset the pace and catch his breath. Late in the match, Flair started no-selling some of Sting's biggest offensive moves. Then came the signature Flair flip over the turnbuckle. Then the Flair flop face first on the canvas. All of Flair's trademark spots that the crowd expected and loved. The message being sent to the audience was crystal clear. Sting was not just competitive with the world champion. He might actually be even stronger and better. The time limit draw finish ensured that Flair retained the championship belt, but Sting absolutely kept all of his momentum. He looked like he could have won if there had been just a bit more time. Record-breaking television viewership, an instant new superstar created, all accomplished in just one single night. Then there was the Lex Luger situation at Starrcade 1988. Luger had only been working as a professional professional wrestler for about 3 years total at that point. He was still quite green and inexperienced by the standards of veterans. But Ric Flair was specifically asked to defend the NWA World Championship against him in the main event of the biggest show of the year. The match is frequently called one of the absolute best carry jobs in the entire history of professional wrestling. Flair led Luger through every single sequence. He structured the match to hide Luger's weaknesses while emphasizing his obvious physical strengths. High stakes, championship-level presentation, and it successfully solidified Luger's status as a permanent top-tier attraction going forward. Lex Luger has spoken many times over the years about the enormous weight and pressure of that particular match. He understood that, to be the man, you have got to beat the man, as Flair's famous catchphrase went. The World Championship represented the real McCoy. True legitimacy in the business. Flair's ability to provide that sense of glory and prestige to the title is what allowed Luger to successfully transition from being just a bodybuilder with a great look into being accepted as a legitimate professional wrestler. On paper, this represents Ric Flair's single biggest strength as a performer, his ability to elevate other people, to make stars out of relative unknowns. Sting, Lex Luger, Ricky Steamboat, Vader. The list of people Flair helped goes on and on. But here is the uncomfortable question that does not get asked often enough. Was Flair's star-making ability truly generous, or was it fundamentally about self-promotion? Every single time Ric Flair made someone else look incredibly good in the ring, he was simultaneously making himself look even better. The world champion who could carry absolutely anyone to a great match. The 60-minute man who could work with a rookie and make it look believable. That reputation made Flair look indispensable to the entire organization. That is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is definitely worth noting and examining. Flair's ability to elevate others also constantly elevated his own position. It reinforced his status. It made him seem absolutely essential to the business. The Sting match is the perfect example of this dynamic. Sting became an overnight sensation. Absolutely nobody denies that. But Ric Flair remained the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Flair remained at the center of the entire company's promotional strategy, and the NWA's entire business model remained built completely around him. The Lex Luger match follows the exact same pattern. Luger looked like £1,000,000 sterling. He looked like a genuine world championship contender. But Flair kept the title belt, and Flair kept the ultimate power within the organization. This is precisely where Ric Flair's legacy becomes genuinely complicated and difficult to evaluate fairly. He absolutely did make other wrestlers into stars. Nobody can deny that historical fact. But he also made absolutely certain that he himself stayed firmly positioned at the very top of the card. And that behavior was not entirely selfless or generous. The NWA system benefited Flair enormously. Being the traveling world champion who could make anyone look great kept him employed. It kept him wealthy. It kept him famous. It gave him leverage to negotiate. And when you look at the actual business numbers, Flair was not always a huge draw at the box office. He himself admitted that he made less money during his first year as champion. The NWA organization needed him to play that specific role, but the paying fans did not always show up in huge numbers. The ability to carry opponents is genuinely valuable, but it is also a tool that Flair used strategically to maintain his position of power, to stay relevant even when fresher stars emerged, to remain the nature boy indefinitely. The Sting and Luger matches are absolutely legendary, and they deserve to be remembered that way. They were legitimately great matches. They created bona fide stars, but they also created and perpetuated the myth that Ric Flair was completely irreplaceable. And perhaps that was the entire point all along. Flair made himself irreplaceable by positioning himself as the only person who could reliably create new stars. And the NWA allowed him to do it because it worked for their business model. But was it actually the best thing for the overall health of professional wrestling? Or was it primarily the best thing for Ric Flair's personal career? Dusty Rhodes represented the complete opposite of everything Ric Flair stood for. The common man, the son of a plumber, the American dream. While Flair constantly flaunted his wealth and luxury lifestyle, Dusty spoke directly for the struggling working class. The legendary Hard Times promo is considered by many wrestlers to be the single greatest promo ever cut in wrestling history. It was delivered in October 1985. Dusty addressed Ric Flair directly and personally. He accused Flair of putting hard times on the families of textile mill workers and automobile factory workers all across the country. Flair was portrayed as the arrogant, out-of-touch champion. No respect for common people, no honor, no decency, just money and flash and showing off. Dusty positioned himself as the relatable underdog, the man who was fighting back against the injustices of the wealthy elite, and it absolutely worked brilliantly. Fans genuinely loved Dusty Rhodes. They genuinely hated Ric Flair. The class conflict felt real and personal, and it drew serious money at the box office. Dusty has admitted quite openly that despite all the personal friction and the inner battle between them, he and Flair made a tremendous amount of money together over the years. He acknowledged Flair's genuine importance to the business. He said the industry owed enormous debts to men like Flair because they had repaid everything in full through their incredible work ethic. The perfect synergy between Flair's jet-flying, limousine-riding persona and Dusty's polka-dot-wearing humility created a template for wrestling feuds that still inform storytelling to this very day. But Dusty Rhodes was not just Flair's rival. He was also the booker, the head writer for Jim Crockett Promotions, and that additional context adds important layers to understanding their relationship. Dusty was directly responsible for creating the comfort zone that the traveling NWA champion operated within. He put Flair in the spotlight repeatedly because Flair served as the perfect villain foil to his own working-class hero character. The broken ankle storyline angle in September 1985 is a perfect example. Flair, along with Ole Anderson and Arn Anderson, viciously attacked Dusty Rhodes. They broke his ankle on television. They forced him to vacate his championship. The fans were absolutely furious, and that emotional investment made the feud even more profitable. Dusty knew exactly how to use Ric Flair to maximum effect, and Flair knew how to play the role he was being given. That professional partnership made both men very wealthy, but it also reveals something important. Flair's success was never just about his individual talent. It was about the specific role he played in someone else's larger creative vision. Flair needed Dusty Rhodes just as much as Dusty needed Flair. The villain requires a hero. The rich require the poor for contrast. The Flash requires the grit. Without Dusty Rhodes, Flair's arrogant character would have been significantly less effective. And that raises the fundamental question yet again. Was Ric Flair great primarily because of his own skills, or because of the tremendously talented people around him who knew how to utilize him properly? The Hard Times promo is absolutely brilliant, one of the best ever, but it only works because Ric Flair was the specific target. Dusty's passionate words only land with such devastating impact because Flair genuinely lived the excessive gimmick in real life. The private jets, the custom-made suits, the arrogance. Flair was the absolutely perfect villain for that era. But a villain only functions properly if there is a hero to fight against. And Dusty Rhodes was that hero. The immense amount of money they made together proves it conclusively. The feud worked because both men were completely committed. But it also demonstrates that Flair was part of a larger system, a system that needed him, but also needed many other pieces to function properly. Dusty's perspective on Flair is quite important to understand. He saw Flair as a partner, not as the greatest in-ring worker, not as the best technical performer, but as the perfect character to build major storylines around. And perhaps that reveals the real truth about Ric Flair's legacy. He was not the best pure worker in the ring. He was the best character, the most fully realized persona. And in professional wrestling, that might actually be more important than technical ability. The Four Horsemen changed wrestling factions forever. 1986. Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson, Tully Blanchard. The group was a direct reflection of Flair's personal, living the gimmick philosophy taken to the extreme. Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard have described the Horseman era as being like the Beatles, Elvis Presley, and the Rolling Stones all combined together into one group. They legitimately traveled together constantly. They partied together. They flew on private jets across the entire country. It was not just a television storyline. It was their actual real life. Flair famously used television interviews to directly invite hundreds of women to meet them at specific hotels like the Baltimore Marriott. The atmosphere of unbelievable excess that surrounded the group defined their entire heel persona to perfection. J.J. Dillon, who served as the group's manager, noted that there was never any real clash of egos among the members. They genuinely enjoyed each other's company, but the lifestyle was not sustainable or appealing for everyone involved. Ole Anderson, who J.J. described as grumpy and disinterested in the whole jet-flying image, eventually left the group entirely. He wanted time off to watch his own son wrestle. That decision highlighted the inevitable tension between personal life and the completely all-consuming nature boy lifestyle. The internal dynamics of the Horsemen provided symbiotic benefits for everyone involved. Other wrestlers have noted that while Flair was a legitimate workhorse champion who could win matches purely through his athletic ability alone, he deliberately chose the shortcut of having the Horsemen protect him instead. Tully Blanchard served as the cowardly member who would run interference. Arn Anderson was the enforcer who could DDT someone into absolute oblivion if they threatened the group's dominance. Arn Anderson's personal perspective on Ric Flair has always been one of deep professional respect. He acknowledged quite openly that while he himself might be tougher in an actual bar fight, Flair was the undisputed king inside the wrestling ring. But the creative demise of the entire group occurred with the rise of the New World Order faction in the mid-1990s. Anderson was particularly vocal about a 1997 parody of the Horsemen that the NWO performed. He felt they took cheap shots at his real-life retirement due to serious injury. It was a moment where the cool heel persona of the NWO came directly at the expense of the legacy the Horsemen had carefully built over more than a decade. The Horsemen clearly demonstrated Flair's power and influence, but they also demonstrated his need for constant backup and protection. He absolutely could wrestle at a high level, but he consciously chose to use enforcers and goons instead. That is not a criticism of his in-ring ability. It is a criticism of his choices and his character. The excessive lifestyle was an essential part of the brand. Flair lived it completely, but it also came with serious consequences. The constant partying, the inappropriate behavior, the reputation for crossing lines. All of it fed into the character, but it also fed into the problems that would later be exposed. The Horsemen were loyal to each other, but loyalty in professional wrestling is always complicated. They remained loyal because it benefited all of them financially. The group made huge money, the group gained enormous fame, and Ric Flair was positioned firmly at the center of it all. The Baltimore Marriott stories are genuinely legendary within wrestling circles, but they are also deeply uncomfortable when examined through modern eyes. Inviting hundreds of women to hotels, excess that clearly crossed ethical lines, behavior that would absolutely not be acceptable by today's standards. The Four Horsemen are remembered quite fondly by many fans, but they also represent a specific time period when wrestling was significantly wilder and far less accountable for bad behavior. And that is an important part of Ric Flair's complicated legacy too. Triple H has consistently called Ric Flair his personal hero, the standard that all wrestlers should be measured against, untouchable. During their time together in the Evolution stable, Triple H functioned as the leader on television, but he always positioned Flair as the ultimate bar that younger members like Randy Orton and Batista should aspire to reach. Triple H's view is that Flair earned the right to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, through decades of completely unmatched performance. That mentorship relationship helped revitalize Flair's career significantly during the early 2000s. Kurt Angle, an Olympic gold medalist known for his own exceptional technical brilliance, had the opportunity to wrestle Ric Flair in 2005. Angle's assessment was genuinely bittersweet. He noted that while Flair absolutely could not wrestle like he used to and was clearly well past his physical prime, he still remained an entertaining and fun performer who knew exactly how to utilize his trademark moves to maintain crowd engagement. Angle praised Flair's insane natural talent, his ability to be somewhat goofy and comedic without completely losing his credibility as a dangerous killer in the ring. But Angle also admitted quite honestly that Flair was simply not the same performer anymore. Then there is the John Cena situation. For many years, Flair was an extremely vocal advocate and supporter for Cena. He said he could not possibly be happier to see Cena tie or potentially break his historic 16-title record. He described Cena as the flagship of the entire company, a genuinely great person whose work ethic directly mirrored Flair's own legendary dedication. But in 2025, during Cena's retirement tour, the entire tone changed dramatically. The promo delivered in Scotland on Monday Night Raw, Cena's explicit vow to erase Flair's legacy completely, to become the last real champion, it shocked everyone. Flair took the shade relatively well in public. The woo is not going away, he said. He will attend WrestleMania 41. He will watch it happen live. But the disrespect was absolutely real and undeniable. Modern wrestling peers respect Flair's historical importance, but they also clearly see and acknowledge the decline. The late years were simply not the same quality. The moves became slower. The matches became shorter. The magic was gradually fading away. Triple H's reverence for Flair is completely genuine, but it is also somewhat selective. He sees Flair primarily as a mentor figure, a legend to be respected, not necessarily as the absolute best pure worker, just as someone who mattered enormously to the business. Kurt Angle's honest assessment is quite refreshing. Flair was past his prime, still good, still entertaining on some level, but not great anymore, not special. And John Cena's public shade represents the final piece of the puzzle. Even the person Flair supported most vocally is now ready to completely move on, to erase the name, to establish himself as the new ultimate standard. The modern perspective is genuinely complicated. Respect for what came before, War, recognition of the obvious decline, and a clear willingness to move forward without Ric Flair positioned at the center anymore. The plane ride from hell changed absolutely everything about how people view Ric Flair. The year 2002, Dark Side of the Ring documentary in 2021. Jim Ross, who was executive vice president of talent relations at the time, called the incident unsavory and completely unbecoming. The allegations were extremely serious. Flair allegedly exposing himself to flight attendants. Wildly unprofessional behavior. The company initially tried to shrug it off as just Flair being Flair. Boys will be boys. Nothing to see here. But the modern post-Me Too cultural environment forced a much harder judgment and reckoning. Jim Ross expressed profound disappointment publicly. He wrote that the small minority of wrestlers who caused all the noise and problems on that flight had a permanent, lasting negative impact on the company's reputation. Ross addressed it directly in his Ross Report column. The unsavory scene, the unprofessional behavior completely unbecoming of grown men. It was a permanent stain on the business. Rory Karpf, the director of the ESPN 30 for 30 documentary titled Ric Flair Nature Boy, offered important insight into how his own personal view of Flair changed over time. During his initial research for the documentary, he was fully aware of Flair's reputation for philandering and public exposure, but the stories were always shared by other wrestlers with a humorous tone, like it was all just funny, harmless antics. It was only after hearing the direct testimony of the flight attendants during the Dark Side of the Ring episode that Karpf realized the humorous framing in his own documentary had been a serious mistake. The flight attendants described being left crying in the shower. That testimony was not funny at all. It was genuinely traumatic. This retrospective analysis highlights a massive shift that has occurred within the wrestling community. Behaviors that were previously dismissed casually as boys being boys are now properly recognized as unacceptable and traumatic. The plane ride from hell is now permanently part of Ric Flair's legacy, and it is not a good part at all. The excess, the complete disrespect, the real harm caused to real people, all of it is there in the historical record. Living the gimmick 24 hours a day used to be celebrated in wrestling culture. Flair was the nature boy constantly, but living the gimmick also meant crossing serious ethical lines, hurting innocent people, and that cannot be ignored or excused. Jim Ross's public disappointment is particularly significant. He was there. He witnessed it firsthand, and he felt genuine shame about what happened. That represents a powerful statement coming from someone who deeply respected Flair professionally. Rory Karpf's regret is equally important. He made an entire feature-length documentary celebrating Flair's career and legacy, but he later realized he had gotten the framing completely wrong. The humorous tone was deeply inappropriate given what actually happened. The ethics reckoning surrounding Flair is still ongoing. His undeniable in-ring brilliance does not erase or excuse his personal misconduct, and the wrestling community is still actively grappling with how to properly handle that contradiction. Modern standards of accountability are fundamentally different now. What was considered acceptable behavior in the past is absolutely not acceptable today, and Flair's legacy suffers enormously because of it. The plane ride from hell serves as a stark reminder that fame does not excuse terrible behavior, that legends are still human beings, and human beings are capable of doing genuinely terrible things to other people. WrestleMania 24 in 2008 was supposed to be the perfect ending. Ric Flair versus Shawn Michaels. Career-threatening retirement stipulation. If Flair lost the match, he would be forced to retire from wrestling forever. The match itself was deeply emotional. Shawn Michaels delivered his famous line, "I'm sorry, I love you." Then he hit sweet chin music and pinned Flair clean. Both performers had tears streaming down their faces. Fans were crying. It was presented as the ultimate farewell to an all-time legend. The very next night on Monday Night Raw was entirely Flair-themed. Members of the Four Horsemen appeared. The Undertaker paid tribute. Legends from across 50 years of wrestling came to honor him. The career felt complete, but Ric Flair could not actually stay retired. He later admitted publicly that he came back to wrestling primarily for financial reasons. He was paying alimony to 3 different women simultaneously. He owed enormous debts to the tax authorities. He desperately needed money. He joined TNA Wrestling. Then in 2022, he promoted an event literally called Ric Flair's Last Match. He was 73 years old. He teamed with Andrade to face Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal. The match was an absolute train wreck. Flair reportedly passed out multiple times during the bout. He finished as a complete bloody mess. Fans were genuinely worried for his physical safety rather than being celebratory. It was surreal, a disaster. The perfect emotional ending from 2008 was completely undone. The 2022 match severely tarnished the legacy, and it became a cautionary tale throughout the industry about the genuine difficulty of walking away from the spotlight. Flair's total inability to stay retired demonstrates the enormous physical and financial toll that professional wrestling extracts from even its greatest performers. He needed the money desperately, story. He needed the attention and validation, and he just kept coming back repeatedly. The 2008 retirement felt so emotionally powerful, specifically because it seemed genuinely final. The story arc was complete, but Flair could not let it go, and that decision diminished the power of that moment significantly. The 2022 match is genuinely painful to watch. A 73-year-old man clearly struggling, passing out, bleeding profusely. It is not heroic, it is just sad. The retirement paradox has become an essential part of understanding Flair's story. The legend who absolutely could not stop. The man who kept desperately chasing one more moment, one more payday, and it raises difficult questions. What matters more, the perfect storybook ending or the messy reality of a man who genuinely could not afford to stop working? Flair's career absolutely should have ended in 2008 with dignity intact, but real life is not a carefully scripted story, and Flair's real life required him to keep going, even when he absolutely should not have. Jim Herd was the biggest idiot in wrestling history, according to Flair. In 1991, Herd wanted to completely change Flair's character. Cut his hair short, give him an earring, turn him into a gladiator gimmick character. Flair saw it as fundamental disrespect to the brand he had spent decades building, so he left WCW entirely, and he took the physical WCW World Championship belt with him straight to WWE. Eric Bischoff ran WCW next. He achieved 83 consecutive weeks of beating WWE in the television ratings, unprecedented success. But in 1998, Bischoff suspended Flair for missing an episode of Thunder because Flair attended his son's amateur wrestling match instead. WWE eventually purchased WCW for only £4.2 million in 2001, the end of an entire era. Flair was not part of the initial Invasion storyline due to his extremely high-priced AOL Time Warner contract. The business warfare throughout Flair's career shows both his value and his baggage simultaneously. He mattered enormously, but he also caused serious problems. And ultimately, WCW collapsed entirely. Flair survived and continued, but the empire fell. Ric Flair changed professional wrestling forever. The elaborate robes, the legendary promos, the jet-setting lifestyle, all of it became part of the industry's DNA permanently. But the legend has visible cracks, and those cracks are part of the complete story. Bret Hart saw nothing but a routine man. Harley Race saw a grinder. Dusty Rhodes saw the perfect villain. The Horsemen saw a leader who needed constant protection. Modern peers witnessed the decline, and the ethics reckoning exposed the harm. John Cena wants to erase the name entirely in 2025, but the woo still follows Ric Flair everywhere. It always will. Whether he was truly the greatest or just the loudest, Flair is wrestling itself, for better or for worse. The debate continues, and it will never end.